I want to start with something small, something that probably doesn't matter to anyone reading this, if anyone ever reads this. But I want to start here because it's the only honest beginning I know. I had a headache that morning. Not a dramatic, ominous, story-worthy headache. Just the ordinary kind, the kind that sits behind your left eye and doesn't quite go away, no matter how much water you drink or how many times you press your fingers against your temple. The kind that makes the lights feel slightly too bright, and the sounds feel slightly too sharp, and the whole world feel like it's moving just a half-second faster than you can keep up with. I remember noticing it when I was suiting up in the maintenance bay. Bay 17, Deck 9, aboard the gas Coranthos Galactic Alliance ship Coranthos, for anyone who doesn't know the naming conventions. A joint species vessel, mostly Vrel crew, a handful of Drenathi navigators, 2 Kishan engineers who never talked to anyone but each other, and then 3 humans. Me, Sergeant Nella Prize. And a kid named Yusuf Barrett, 22 years old, fresh out of the Terran Fleet Academy, still convinced that wearing your uniform absolutely perfectly was the most important thing a person could do. I liked Yusuf, I want that on record. The headache wasn't going away. I remember pressing my palm flat against the cold metal wall of the maintenance bay and just standing there for a second, eyes closed. One of the Vrel crew, a secondary engineer named Orvath, who was approximately the shape and texture of a very large river eel standing upright and wearing clothes, paused near me, made a sound that my translation chip rendered as mild inquiry, which in Vrel sounds like a small bird being gently surprised. "You are stationary," Orvath said. That's how the translation always came out. Vrel don't ask questions technically. They just observe things and wait for you to explain them. "Headache," I said. Orvath considered this for approximately 4 seconds. Humans experience localized cranial pressure signals as pain. This is inefficient. "Yeah," I said. "We know." And that was the end of that conversation, because Orvath moved on and I suited up and I went to do my job, which that morning involved checking the plasma conduit seals along the outer hull of decks 7 through 11. Routine. Completely routine. The kind of work I'd done so many times that my hands knew what to do without my brain needing to be particularly involved. I don't know when exactly I started to feel worse. I know it wasn't right away. I know I finished the first 6 conduit checks before I noticed that the headache had spread, not gotten sharper, just wider, like it was filling more of my head, like someone was pouring something warm and heavy into the space behind my eyes. I noted it in my maintenance log. Felt odd, I wrote. Could be the pressure differential from the outer hull checks. Ate some protein ration before coming on shift. Probably nothing. That's actually in my maintenance log, that probably nothing. I've seen it since then in the transcripts. I've seen it reproduced in 14 different alien language reports. A Drenathi legal brief I was shown months later quoted it directly, right before describing what happened next, and every time I see those 2 words, probably nothing, I feel something I can't quite name. Not embarrassment, not exactly. Something more like the feeling of watching a version of yourself who didn't know what was coming. Something like grief for your own ordinary stupidity. Probably nothing. I was on the outer hull of Deck 8, at Conduit Junction J14, when I had what I later learned to call a hypoxic cascade event. At the time I experienced it as the universe tipping sideways and then going very, very dark. I did not lose consciousness all the way. I want to be precise about this because the medical reports are imprecise about this and it matters. I didn't black out. I went somewhere in between where everything was still there, the hull, the stars, the low vibration of the ship's drive through the soles of my boots, the faint static hiss of the suit's life support, but I couldn't move, couldn't respond, just sort of floated in it, aware but cut off, like being behind glass. That lasted, I don't know, minutes. My suit's telemetry recorded it as 11 minutes and 40 seconds, but time doesn't work right when you're in that state. I came back to myself when I heard my name in my earpiece. Nella Prize, her voice very controlled, very level, the way it always was when she was trying not to sound alarmed. "Holt, Holt, your vitals just threw a flag, talk to me." I managed to say something. She told me later it was "I'm here," but she wasn't sure. I don't remember saying it. I remember trying to say it. They pulled me in through the emergency bay access. Orvath was there, and Nella, and two Vrel medtechs who handled me with the very brisk, very efficient, very slightly irritated energy that Vrel medtechs always seem to have, like a human doctor who's doing their best but you've interrupted them from something they considered more important. My helmet came off. The air in the medical bay smelled like antiseptic and something faintly sweet that I could never identify, a Drenathi air additive, I think, supposed to be calming. It mostly just made me feel like I was in a waiting room. They ran diagnostics. Nella stood at the edge of the room with her arms crossed and her face set in the specific expression she used when she was pretending not to be worried, the one where she was very carefully not frowning. Yusuf wasn't there. He was still on shift. I found out later that Nella hadn't told him I'd been pulled in. She didn't want him rattled. The Vrel medtech read me my own vitals. Oxygen saturation had dropped, heart rate irregular, something in my blood chemistry flagging as elevated, a specific protein marker that in humans is associated with neural inflammation. He said this with the exact same tone you'd use to read a grocery list. Just information. No alarm. Just, here are the numbers, here is what they indicate. "You require observation," he told me. "The physician will assess." Segment 2, Testimony of NELLA Prize. Sergeant Taryn Fleet, Technical Division. Recorded at Alliance Oversight Station Meridian 9, Cycle 14, Month 4. I want to be clear about something from the start, because I've read the preliminary reports and they soften things that don't deserve to be softened. Marcus wasn't supposed to be seen by Dr. Keth Oreville at all. The Coranthos' primary human-compatible medic, a Drenathi woman named Lessa, and she was genuinely good, I trusted her, was occupied with a critical patient in the forward medical bay. A Vrel engineer had been injured in a systems fault in the engine room. Real emergency. Lessa was in surgery. She couldn't step away. So Marcus got Keth Oreville. I didn't know who Keth Oreville was at that point. I just knew he was Galactic Medical Authority staff, which meant he outranked every medic on the ship while in a medical context, and he'd been aboard for what I understood was a research consult, some kind of biological survey the GMA was conducting on joint species vessels. Routine, I was told. He wasn't a ship's physician, not permanently. He was a researcher. He walked into the bay and I immediately felt wrong about it. I want to be honest about that. I felt wrong before anything happened. There was something about the way he moved precise, too precise. Not like someone assessing a patient, more like someone assessing an opportunity. He was Kishin, taller than most, with those layered secondary eyes that Kishin have, the small ones that don't move much just below the main pair. The way he looked at Marcus, first thing, before he'd read a single diagnostic readout, he looked at Marcus with something that, in a human face, I would have called recognition, like he already knew what he was looking at. Maybe I'm reading that in after the fact. I've asked myself that 100 times. Maybe I'm just retrofitting meaning onto a moment that was genuinely innocent, but I don't think so. I was standing in that room. I was watching. He read the vitals. He asked Marcus some questions, brief, standard, the kind that a human doctor would also ask. How long had the headache been present? Had he experienced similar episodes before? Any relevant medical history? Marcus answered all of them. He's cooperative by nature, Marcus. Not naive, but he gives people the good faith assumption. It's something I always respected about him. Oreville said there were elevated inflammatory markers, and that he was going to administer a stabilizing compound. He said it was standard GMA protocol for neural inflammatory response in hybrid environment crews. He said the words, standard GMA protocol, and pulled out an injector like that settled the matter. I said, "What's in it?" He looked at me, not the way you look at someone who's asked a reasonable question, the way you look at something that is technically entitled to be in the room but is not making things easier. Stabilizing compound, he said again. GMA standard. I'd like to see the composition, I said. It's restricted formulation, Oravel said. Research development, not available for general review. And here's where I made a mistake. I know I made a mistake. I've known it since the moment it happened. I looked at Marcus and Marcus looked at me, and his face was this complicated thing, tired and not feeling well and not wanting to make more of this than it needed to be, and I thought, he's sick. The man is sick. He needs something. And we are on a joint species ship and Oravel is GMA credentialed and maybe I'm being paranoid. I said, fine, but I want the batch number recorded. Oravel recorded a batch number. I saw him do it. I didn't know then, none of us knew then, that the batch number he recorded corresponded to a completely different compound, that the injector in his hand was not GMA standard anything, that it had been prepared 3 weeks before we ever boarded the Coranthos, in a GMA research lab that Marcus and I had never heard of, under a project designation that didn't exist in any public file. He administered the injection, and I watched Marcus's face, and Marcus just nodded like, okay, fine, done. His eyes were still a little unfocused from the episode on the hull. The sweet Drenathi air was still doing its thing. The Vrel medtech was writing something in his panel on the other side of the room. Oravel packed up his case and said Marcus should rest for 4 hours, and then could return to light duty, and walked out. And that was it. That's how it started. Segment 3, Personal Log of MARCUSDALEN Holt. Entry date, Cycle 7, Month 4 continued, written approximately 6 hours after injection. I felt better almost immediately. That's the thing. That's the thing that makes it hard to be straightforwardly angry when I think about those first hours, because whatever Oravel put in me, and I know now, I know exactly what it was, it worked. The headache went away in about 20 minutes. My oxygen saturation stabilized. The neural inflammation markers dropped. When the Vrel medtech ran a follow-up scan 2 hours later, every number was where it was supposed to be. I went back to my bunk and slept for 3 hours, and woke up feeling better than I had in weeks. I noticed the first thing that evening. I was in the crew mess, eating real food, or what counts as real food on a joint species vessel, which means a protein composite that's technically nutritionally complete and technically edible and technically, in a legal and biological sense, food. Nella was across from me. She was telling me something about the quarterly maintenance rotation schedule, and I was listening, or mostly listening, and I had my palm flat on the table because the table was cool and I liked the feeling of it. And I felt the table. I know that sounds stupid. I know that sounds like nothing. But I don't mean I felt the surface of the table with my hand. I mean I felt through the table. I felt the microvibrations in the composite alloy, the way they propagated through the molecular structure, the resonance pattern from the ship's drive 4 decks below us. I felt it the way you feel your own heartbeat from the inside. Like I was briefly, impossibly, a part of the table. It lasted about 2 seconds, and then it was gone. I looked at my hand. My hand looked the way it always looked. I pressed it flat against the table again. Nothing, just cool metal. "You all right?" Nella asked. "Yeah," I said, "just tired." I didn't tell her. I should have. But it had lasted 2 seconds and was probably just fatigue, and whatever the compound Oravel had given me was still in my system. Probably just my nervous system recalibrating. The human body does weird things when it's been stressed. I know that. I ate my food. I listened to Nella talk about the maintenance schedule. I did not mention the table. I noticed the second thing the next morning. I was back on shift light duty as Oreville had specified, which for me meant internal systems checks rather than whole work. I was in Junction Room C, Deck 7, running diagnostics on the power distribution nodes. Standard process. Connect the scanner to the node interface, run the diagnostic cycle, log the results. I'd done it 1,000 times. I connected the scanner, started the cycle, and between one breath and the next, I knew the results before the cycle completed. Not guessed, not estimated based on experience. Knew the specific values, the precise state of every power relay in the node cluster, the variance levels, the efficiency ratings. It was like reading a screen that wasn't there yet, like knowing the answer to a math problem before you've worked through the steps. The scanner finished its cycle. The results appeared. They matched exactly what I'd already known. I stood in that junction room for a long time. Then I ran the cycle again. And again I knew the results first. And again they were exactly right. I sat down on the floor of Junction Room C and I put my back against the wall and I stared at the scanner in my hands and I thought, something is very wrong with me, or something is very different about me, and I don't know which one it is. Segment 4, Intercepted Communication. GMA Research Network, Classified Channel. Sender Designation, KTHORAVEL, Senior Research Analyst, Division 12. Recipient Designation, Director MAEVEN SOLISS, GMA Project Sovereignty. Transmission Date, Cycle 8, Month 4. Note, this communication was intercepted by Galactic Alliance Intelligence in Cycle 13, Month 4, as part of the broader investigation. It is included here as part of the official record. Director Solis. Administration was successful. Subject tolerated injection without incident. No adverse physiological response. The human genome's interaction with the sovereignty package appears to be proceeding according to project models, which is to say, it is proceeding in ways the project models did not anticipate. For clarity, I administered the Sovereignty 7 nanite package to the human subject during a routine medical encounter. The subject experienced a minor hypoxic episode, which provided the access window we required. The encounter was logged under standard neural inflammatory protocol. The batch number recorded in the ship's medical file references compound NS440, which is a legitimate GMA stabilizer. There is no flag on the file. The human medic assigned to the vessel was occupied with a concurrent emergency and did not attend. The subject's colleague, a Sergeant Terran Fleet, requested compound composition detail. I cited restricted research classification. She accepted this, though she recorded a batch number request. I managed the record accordingly. Subject is now under observation, at remove. I am tracking nanite integration through passive monitoring. The Sovereignty 7 package should, per project parameters, integrate with the human neural architecture over 48 to 72 hours, and then enter dormant state, awaiting activation command from authorized GMA personnel only. This is the standard expected outcome. I want to flag one anomaly. 14 hours post-injection, passive tracking indicates the nanite package is not dormant. It is active. The integration did not follow the expected timeline. In a Vrel or Drenathi host, the Sovereignty package integrates over 72 hours and then enters a fully passive state, completely quiescent until activated by GMA command sequence. In this human subject, integration appears to have completed in under 14 hours, and the package is not passive. It appears to be interfacing, establishing novel pathways. I do not have adequate telemetry to characterize the nature of these pathways from the passive monitor alone. This may be a product of the unusual human neural architecture. As you know, the project chose human subjects specifically because preliminary models suggested the Sovereignty package would achieve deeper integration in human neural tissue than in any other species we've tested. The human brain's structural flexibility, its capacity for neuroplastic adaptation, was identified as an asset. It may be that asset is behaving beyond our parameters. I recommend increased monitoring. I recommend against alerting the human subject at this time. The subject is not aware of the nature of what was administered. There is no medical or legal reason the subject would receive this information. We filed under standard treatment protocol. If the subject raises concerns, we can address them through the appropriate channels. I do not recommend disclosure. Respectfully, Keth Oreville. Segment 5, Personal Log of MARCUSDALEN Hold. Entry date, Cycle 9, Month 4. On the third day, I told Nella. I told her because I'd spent 2 days trying to convince myself it wasn't real, and then I spent approximately 6 hours trying to convince myself it was real but harmless, and then I woke up on the third morning and I could feel every power relay on Deck 7 without touching anything, and I thought, okay, something has happened to me. Someone needs to know. I told her in the maintenance bay because we were alone there at 600, and neither of us was ever fully operational before a second cup of whatever the Vrel synthesizer produced that was technically coffee. I told her quickly, like pulling off a bandage, all of it, the table, the scanner, the way I'd been feeling since the injection, the way it kept expanding. Each day a little more of the ship I could sense. Each day the detail a little finer. Nella listened without interrupting. That's a skill. Not everyone has it. She just watched my face and listened. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "When Oreville gave you that injection, the batch number he recorded, do you remember it?" I didn't. I hadn't been paying that close attention. "I do," she said. "NS440, she looked at me. "I ran it this morning. NS440 is a neural inflammation stabilizer, standard formulation, widely used. I've seen it used before. I've seen its effects before." I waited. "What you're describing is not the effect of NS440, she said. And that was the moment, right there. Because I'd been holding onto the idea that maybe this was some unusual side effect, some rare human response to a known compound. That maybe I should flag it to Lessa, the Drenathi medic, and she'd run some tests and tell me my nervous system had just reacted oddly to a standard stabilizer, and there was a known treatment and everything would be fine. Nella saying it wasn't NS440 made that idea impossible. "Then what is it?" I said. "I don't know," she said, "but I think we need to find out before Oreville finds out that we're asking." We went to Lessa. We went quietly, not through official channels, not with a formal medical request that would show up in ship's logs. Nella spoke to her privately, in the forward medical bay, after the last of the Vrel surgical team had cleared out. Lessa was exhausted. The engineer she'd been treating was stable now, but it had been a long surgery, and she had the flat, wrung-out look of a doctor who has been very focused for a very long time. She listened to what Nella told her, and then she looked at me with her large, dark Drenathi eyes, and she said, "You need to let me scan you. Not diagnostic, deep imaging. Neural pathway mapping." I said yes, obviously. The deep imager takes about 40 minutes. You lie inside it and it maps every electrical pathway in your nervous system, every synaptic structure, everything. It's not painful. It's not even particularly uncomfortable. You just lie there and it does its work, and you try not to think too hard about what it might be finding. Lessa had the results in about 15 minutes after the scan completed. I know because I watched her face change. Not dramatically, not a gasp or a visible shock, just a subtle shift, the Drenathi equivalent of a very sharp intake of breath, a slight dilation of the outer eye membrane. Small signals, but Lessa was not a dramatic person, and those small signals from her meant something significant. She showed me the scan. "I am not a doctor. I am a maintenance technician. I understand power systems, pressure systems, structural integrity. I do not understand neural imaging, but I did not need to understand neural imaging to see that what Lessa was showing me was different. The scan showed my nervous system familiar enough, the way your own face is familiar, and then it showed something else, woven through it, threaded through every pathway, every structure dense at the neural nexus points, lighter along the peripheral system. Bright, geometric, not organic. Those are not your cells, Lessa said. No, I said. They're constructed, engineered at the nanoscale. She was very calm, the way doctors get when they're processing something genuinely unprecedented and are too professional to lose composure. They're integrated with your nervous system at a depth I have not seen this before. I need to look up what I'm looking at. What is it? Nella said. I don't know yet, Lessa said, but they're not passive. Whatever they are, they're active. They're doing something. Segment 6. Personal log of MARCUSDALEN Holt. Entry date, Cycle 10, Month 4. I found out what they were doing on Day 4. Lessa had been researching through the night. She came to find me at 800 with the look of someone who had not slept and had found something they could not unfind. She brought me to her office, private, door closed, and she pulled up a file on her screen and she turned it toward me and said, "Do you know what this is?" The file was a research abstract. GMA Internal Research Division, Division 12. The abstract was brief, 1 page, heavily technical, but the title was in plain galactic standard, and my translation chip handled it fine. Project Sovereignty. Controlled Nanite Interface Systems for Multi-Species Host Integration. Preliminary Efficacy Report. I read it, not quickly. I sat there and read it, and Lessa let me and Nella stood by the door and nobody said anything. The abstract described a system of engineered nanites, nanoscale machines, living at the intersection of biology and mechanics, designed to integrate with a host nervous system, and once integrated, perform specific functions: monitoring, data transmission, environmental interface. They could sense through the host's sensory system and also extend that system, allow the host to interface directly with machines, with power systems, with anything that processed electrical current. They could transmit data about the host's physiological state to an external monitoring system. They could, the abstract used the phrase, accept activation commands from authorized personnel. Meaning, once inside you, they could be told what to do by someone outside of you. The abstract described them as a tool for monitoring joint species crews in high-risk environments, a way of keeping personnel healthy and aware in situations where standard medical check-in protocols were insufficient. It was framed carefully. The language was clean and careful and institutional, and underneath all of that language, underneath the technical terminology and the policy speak and the research framing, what it described was this: they had put something in me that could be used to control me. Not crudely, not some science fiction puppet string, more sophisticated than that. The nanites could, according to the abstract, modulate the host's neurochemical state, stress response, alertness levels, compliance thresholds. They could introduce signals into the host's peripheral nervous system, a sensation of comfort, a sensation of unease, a sensation of urgency that the host would experience as their own. They could, in extreme protocols, more directly interfere with motor function. They had put a control system inside me. Without my knowledge, without my consent, administered under the cover of legitimate medical treatment while I was sick and disoriented on the floor of a medical bay. I sat in Lessa's office for a while after I finished reading. I don't know how long. Nobody interrupted me. I was aware of the hum of the ship around me. I was aware, now that I knew what I was aware of the sensation of the ship, not just the vibrations through the floor but the whole electrical architecture of it, decks 7 through 9 like a map I'd memorized without choosing to. Power distribution nodes, life support flow regulators, the drive system. I thought they put this in me so that someone else could control it. And then I thought, but that's not how it's working. The abstract had been very clear about one thing. The sovereignty nanites were designed with a hierarchical command structure. They integrated with the host, yes. They used the host's neural architecture as their operating environment, yes. But they responded to commands from external authorized sources, GMA personnel with the correct authentication codes. The host was the vessel. The GMA was the operator. Except they weren't operating anything. Lessa's scans had shown that the nanites were active, were interfacing, were doing exactly what the abstract described. But there were no incoming command signals. Oreville's passive monitoring had been tracking them, but he hadn't issued any command sequences. And yet they were active, interfacing, extending my senses through the ship's systems as if they'd been given instructions. They haven't been activated from outside, Lessa said carefully when I pointed this out. But they are active. So who's activating them? Nella said. Lessa looked at me. The most consistent reading is, you are. I need to explain something, and I'm aware it's going to sound like I'm making this up. I'm aware it's going to sound exactly like something someone makes up when they want to make themselves sound more significant than they are. So I'm going to try to say it as plainly as I know how. The sovereignty nanites were designed to receive commands from external sources. They were designed with a command reception structure, a kind of hierarchy built into their operating logic. The GMA designed them this way deliberately. The host was meant to be passive. The external operator was meant to hold all authority. But the human nervous system, apparently, doesn't process things that way. Lessa explained it to me over 3 hours in that office. What she'd found in the research, what she'd found in my scans, what she'd had to piece together from incomplete data, because the full project sovereignty files were classified far above anything she could access. The sovereignty nanites had integrated with my neural architecture. And in integrating, in using my brain's own pathways as their operating structure, they had, in whatever functional sense matters, started listening to me. Not to an external operator, to me, to the pattern of my neural activity, my intentions, my attention. When I'd felt the table, I hadn't been receiving an errant signal. My brain had reached toward the table the way it always does, the way human curiosity works, and the nanites, integrated into my neural pathways, had extended that reach. When I'd known the scanner results before the scan completed, my brain had reached toward the distribution nodes with some unconscious professional attention, the kind I've developed over years of doing this work, and the nanites had interfaced. I'd been giving them instructions, not deliberately, not consciously, but I'd been giving them instructions through the ordinary act of thinking and paying attention, and they'd been following them. The external command structure is still there, Lessa said. Technically, it exists in their base architecture, but it's subordinate. Your neural patterns have established priority. Can the GMA override that? Nella said. She asked it very flatly, in the voice she used when she was asking the most important question in the room. Lessa thought for a long moment. I don't know. The design assumes external commands take priority, but the design assumed the host's neural system would remain passive. Yours isn't passive, and there's nothing in the research I've found that describes what happens when the host's neural system establishes a command relationship with the nanites before external commands are established. So we're in new territory, I said. Yes, Lessa said. I think you might be the only case of this that has ever existed. Entry date, Cycle 12, Month 4. 2 days after the conversation with Lessa, they came. I want to be precise about this too, because the way the preliminary reports describe it sounds almost civil, and it wasn't exactly civil. It also wasn't exactly a raid. It was somewhere in between, which is the most unsettling place things can be. 3 GMA officials arrived aboard the Coranthos via shuttle. They presented credentials to the ship's commanding officer, a Vrel named Drathevos, who ran a tight ship, and had treated the 3 humans aboard with the particular variety of efficient respect that very competent Vrel tend to offer to subordinates they have assessed as competent. Drathevos received the GMA credentials, and because GMA authority supersedes ship command in medical matters, allowed them aboard. I found out they were there because Nella told me. She'd heard through someone who'd heard through Yusuf, who, it turns out, had been watching more carefully than anyone had given him credit for. Yusuf had seen the shuttle dock, had seen the GMA insignia, had flagged it to Nella without knowing exactly why, except that he knew Marcus had been seen by a GMA doctor, and that Nella had been acting carefully for the past few days, and that Yusuf Barrett at 22 had good instincts. "They're looking for you," Nella said. "Or they're coming to you. They've presented a medical recall order." "A what?" I said. "Medical recall order. It's a GMA authority instrument. Basically, they can require you to report for medical evaluation, and they can require that evaluation to be conducted by GMA personnel, not ship's medical staff." "Meaning not Lessa." "Meaning not Lessa," Nella said. I thought about what I now knew was inside me, what they had put inside me without asking. I thought about the abstract's description of the extreme protocols, the direct motor function interference. I thought about what a GMA facility, with full access to the sovereignty nanite command structure, could do to me if I was inside their medical bay and not inside this ship. "How much time?" I said. "An hour, maybe less." "Okay," I said, "I need to think." I went to the one place on the ship where I was alone and where I could think, which was Junction Room C on Deck 7, where I'd first noticed what the nanites could do. I went there, and I sat on the floor the way I'd sat that first time, and I pressed my palms flat against the deck plating, and I let myself feel. That's the only word for it. I let myself feel what the nanites could feel. The ship unfolded in my awareness like a map being spread open, not just the decks I'd been sensing for days, but further. The whole electrical architecture of the ship, the communication nodes, the internal network, the external communication arrays. I could feel the GMA officials moving through Deck 4 toward the command center. I could feel their equipment, personal scanners, communication devices, the way you can feel a new pressure in a room, a change in the air. I could feel Oravel. He was with them, hanging back, not leading, staying behind the 2 officials who were actually presenting the recall order. The passive monitoring device he'd been using to track the nanites was in his coat, and I could feel that too. Could feel it the way you feel a hand on your shoulder in a dark room, the sensation of being watched by something you hadn't consented to. I sat there and I breathed and I thought. And then I made a decision. Segment 8, Testimony of Commander DRATHVOS. Commanding Officer Gas Coranthos. Recorded at Alliance Oversight Station Meridian 9, Cycle 14, Month 4. The GMA officials presented a standard medical recall order for crew member Holt, Marcus Dallin, serial number TF-882 Cova 7. I received the order. I acknowledged it. I was obligated under Alliance Medical Authority protocol to acknowledge it. I did not know at that point what had been done to crew member Holt without authorization. I did not know the nature of the injection administered by research analyst Oravel. I knew only that crew member Holt had been treated by GMA personnel following a health episode, and that GMA personnel were now initiating a follow-up recall procedure. The officials indicated crew member Holt should be brought to the forward medical bay for evaluation. Standard practice. I had no reason at that moment to refuse. I will say this. Research analyst Oravel, who was present with the officials, did not speak during the initial exchange. He was observing. I noted this. Oravel had been aboard my vessel for 6 weeks, and I had formed an impression of him as someone who was careful about what he showed. A careful observer watches too closely. I was aware of him watching my crew members' reactions to the GMA officials, in a way that felt less like a colleague's attention and more like an assessment. But again, at that moment, I had no grounds to refuse the order. What happened next I observed on the ship's internal monitoring footage, which I reviewed in full at Cycle 13, Month 4, during the early stages of the investigation. I will describe what I saw. Crew member Holt entered the corridor outside the command center at the same time the GMA officials were departing it, following my acknowledgement of the recall order. The timing may have been coincidental. I am not certain it was. He walked without urgency. This was notable. He had been told, presumably by Sergeant Prize, that 3 GMA officials and research analyst Oravel were aboard and had issued an order for his presence. Most personnel in that situation would walk with some degree of tension. Crew member Holt walked the way he always walked, steady, unhurried, the walk of someone who knows exactly what he is doing and is conserving his energy for when it matters. He met the GMA officials in Corridor 7, Deck 4. The lead official, a Vrel named Senior Auditor Vrenkath, significantly ranked, the kind of GMA authority that typically makes people considerably nervous, addressed him by name and indicated he was required to accompany them for medical evaluation. Crew member Holt said, and I have the exact audio from the ship's log, "I know why you're here, and I'll come with you, but I want to have a conversation first." Senior Auditor Vrenkath was not expecting that. You could see it in his posture. Vrel posture is quite readable, actually, if you've spent enough time working with them. The slight lean back, the secondary limbs briefly activating before returning to neutral position. Not alarmed, just recalibrating. "This is a medical recall," Vrenkath said. "There is no negotiation provision." "I'm not negotiating," crew member Holt said. He said it very calmly. He said it the way you'd correct a minor misunderstanding with a colleague you respected. "I just want to have a conversation about what was put in me and how it's working and what happens if you try to activate the external command structure. I want to be precise about this moment because the subsequent investigation has focused on it considerably." When crew member Holt said, "What happens if you try to activate the external command structure?" he was referencing classified project data he should not have had access to. The GMA official's response to this reference is visible in the monitoring footage. Vrenkath went very still. The second official, a Kishan, name not relevant to this record, looked immediately at Oravel. Oravel's response was to look at the floor. That single look at the floor. That was the moment I understood that what was happening in my corridor was not a routine medical recall. Segment 9, Personal Log of MARCUSDALEN Holt. Entry date, Cycle 12, Month 4 continued. I want to explain what I was doing, because I think it's easy to read what happened in that corridor as a confrontation, as a challenge, as some dramatic moment of defiance. And some of it was that. I won't pretend it wasn't, but mostly it was practical. I had spent the past hour, alone in Junction Room C, learning what I could do. Not experimenting wildly, carefully, methodically. I pressed my awareness through the ship's systems the way you'd test a structure you weren't sure would hold, gently, incrementally, checking each point before you commit weight to it. I learned what the Nanites could reach and what they couldn't. I learned how much precision I had. I learned what happened when I pulled my attention back, systems released, returned to their independent operation, nothing disrupted. And I learned one more thing. I learned that Oravel's passive monitoring device was not just monitoring. It was also, at low power, broadcasting the Sovereignty Nanite activation sequence, the command line equivalent of keeping a hand near the switch. He'd been broadcasting it since the injection, too low power to trigger the full protocol, but establishing presence. Establishing the command hierarchy the Nanites were designed to follow. Except the Nanites weren't following it, they were following me. When I walked into that corridor, I knew what Oravel's device was doing. I knew it the way I knew the state of every power relay on Deck 7, through the nanites themselves, the part of me that now extended outward like roots through the ship's systems. I felt the broadcast the way you feel someone standing too close. I could also feel what the nanites did with it, which was nothing. They received the signal. They processed it according to whatever internal logic they had, and then they directed their attention back to me, the way a dog might glance at a stranger's hand signal and then look back at the person they knew. That's not a perfect metaphor, but it's the best one I have. So when I stood in front of Vrenkath and said, "What happens if you try to activate the external command structure?" I wasn't guessing. I wasn't bluffing. I knew exactly what I was describing, and I knew exactly what the answer was. And I needed Vrenkath to know that I knew. Because the only way this conversation went the way I needed it to go was if they understood, before we got to whatever the GMA's next move was going to be, that they were not operating with the informational advantage they thought they had. Vrenkath went very still. "Good, that was exactly right." "Where did you get that terminology?" he said. "The nanites showed me what they are," I said, which was close enough to true. "I've had 4 days to get acquainted." Segment 10. Testimony of Senior Auditor Vryan Nkath. Galactic Medical Authority, Oversight Division. Recorded at GMA Review Board, Cycle 21, Month 4. Note: this testimony was recorded as part of the GMA Internal Review Board process. Auditor Vrenkath requested that his testimony be incorporated into the full incident record. This request was granted. I want to be clear that I was not fully briefed on the nature of Project Sovereignty before I was sent to the Coranthos. I was told that a research subject had been administered a classified compound and was displaying anomalous responses, and that the compound was proprietary GMA research material that needed to be evaluated and, if necessary, recovered. I was not told what recovery would entail in practice. I understand now what was meant. I did not understand it then. When the human crew member Holt met us in the corridor and used the phrase external command structure, I knew immediately that the situation had moved outside the parameters I'd been given. You don't use that phrase without knowing what it refers to. And a human crew member on a joint species maintenance vessel should not know what it refers to, because the phrase belongs to classified GMA research documentation. He was calm. That's the detail I keep coming back to. I have been a GMA oversight official for 21 years. I have served recall orders on hundreds of subjects, most of them Vrel or Drenathi, some Kishan, a few from other species. In my experience, subjects served with recall orders are almost always one of two things: cooperative and frightened, or resistant and frightened. The fear is always there. This human was not frightened. He was measuring me. I could see it. The way he was looking at me, not confrontationally, not with aggression, just very precisely, the way you look at a complex system you're trying to fully understand. He was calculating in real time exactly what leverage each party held. He said, "I'm going to give you some information. I'd like you to pass it to whoever made the decision to administer this without my consent, because I think they should understand the situation they've created before they make any further decisions." "Vrenkath me," I said. "The recall order requires that you accompany us for." "I know what the recall order requires," he said, not rudely, just factually. "And I'm not refusing it. I'll come with you. But I need you to hear what I'm about to tell you, because if you take me to a GMA facility without understanding it, you're going to make things considerably worse." I listened. I have asked myself many times since whether I was right to listen, whether my authority required me to stop him and simply execute the recall order regardless. But he was right that there was information I didn't have. And I have been doing this long enough to know that executing authority in the absence of information is one of the most reliable ways to make disasters larger. I listened. He said, "The nanites in my system are designed to accept commands from GMA-authorized personnel. That command hierarchy is built into their architecture. You know this because it's in the project design. What you apparently don't know, or what whoever designed this apparently didn't anticipate, is what happens when a human nervous system has had 4 days to integrate with a nanite package that learns. They don't wait for external commands anymore. They've established a command relationship with me. Not a passive one, an active one. They've already decided who they're listening to." He paused, he let that sit. Then he said, "If you take me to a GMA facility and you attempt to activate the external command protocol, not just broadcast it at low power the way your colleague there has been doing since day one, but actually activate it, full command sequence, I can tell you what's going to happen. The nanites are going to receive the signal. They're going to process it. And then they're going to look at me and wait for me to tell them what to do." He looked at Oravel when he said that last part. Oravel was still looking at the floor. "I don't know," crew member Holt said, "what the full command protocol does when the host nervous system is actively countermanding it. Neither does anyone else, because it's never happened before. What I do know is that I'd rather not find out inside a GMA facility." I stood there in that corridor, and I made the calculation that has formed the basis of everything the GMA has had to do since. He was right. We didn't know what would happen. We didn't know what we'd built in that interaction between our engineered system and this particular human nervous system. We didn't know if forcing the command protocol would work. We didn't know what it would do to him if it didn't. We didn't know what it would do to our own system. And beyond all of that, beyond the practical calculation, there was something else, something I have thought about many times since. We had put it in him without his knowledge, without his consent. We had looked at a human who was sick and disoriented, and we had used that moment to install, inside his body, a system designed to allow external parties to control him. He had found out. He had spent 4 days not panicking and not running, but carefully, methodically understanding his situation, and now he was standing in a ship corridor asking, not demanding, asking to have a conversation. The very least we could do was have the conversation. I said, "What do you want?" Entry date, cycle 12, month 4 late. What did I want? It's funny. I'd been thinking about that for an hour in Junction Room C, and I'd come to the conversation in the corridor knowing what I was going to say, what I needed to establish, what the minimum acceptable outcome was. I'd been very practical about it, very task-oriented, the way you approach a systems problem. But when Vrenkath asked me that question, "What do you want?" there was a half-second where the practical framing fell away and I just felt it. The whole thing. The headache that morning. The sweet Drenathi air in the medical bay. Oravel's expression, what I'd read as neutral professional focus and was actually, I now understood, something much colder. The 4 days of discovering, increment by increment, what had been done to me. There was a half-second where what I wanted was not something I could have said in a ship corridor, where what I wanted was to be angry in the way that anger is supposed to work, hot and consuming and clarifying, where what I wanted was for the person who'd made this decision to stand in front of me and explain it. But that half-second passed, and what came back was practical. 3 things, I said. First, full disclosure of what was administered to me, not a summary, not a redacted overview. The complete project documentation, explained to me by someone who understands it until I understand it. Vrenkath waited. Second, a medical team I choose, not GMA personnel. Dr. Lessa, ship's medic. She's already familiar with the situation and I trust her. She conducts any follow-up examination. GMA observers welcome, but Lessa leads. And third, Vrenkath said. Third, I said, I want it documented formally. In whatever record-keeping system the GMA uses for incidents that it would prefer not to become public. I want the fact of what was done to me, without consent, administered under false pretenses. I want that documented in language that's clear enough that nobody can later reframe it as a research volunteer arrangement or an emergency treatment decision. It gets called what it was. Vrainkath looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, "And in exchange?" "In exchange," I said, "I come with you for evaluation, cooperatively, less a present. I participate in whatever assessment you need to conduct to understand the current state of the nanite integration. Because you clearly don't fully understand it, and neither do I, and I'd rather figure it out together than in a situation where we're working against each other." I watched him think. "You could have refused the recall order," he said. "You said you know you have the right to. Why are you cooperating?" I thought about that. I thought about the honest answer, which was complicated, and about the simpler version of the honest answer. "Because I don't want to be at war with the GMA," I said. "I'm a maintenance technician on a joint species vessel. I'm not trying to start a political incident. I'm not trying to leverage this into something. I just want to understand what's in me, and I want the record to be accurate about how it got there, and then I want to go back to work." He looked at me for another long moment. Then, "I'll need to consult with my superiors." "Of course," I said. "Take the time you need. I'll be in my quarters." I walked back to my quarters. I passed Yusuf Barrett in the corridor coming off shift, still wearing his absolutely perfectly maintained uniform. He took one look at my face and said, "Sir, you all right?" "Getting there," I said. He nodded, the way 22-year-olds nod when they don't fully understand the situation but have decided to trust you. I appreciated it more than I could say. Segment 12, Intercepted Communication. Director Solace. I am transmitting this without standard encryption protocols because, given the circumstances, I do not have confidence that encrypted channels in proximity to this subject are fully secure. I will explain. The human subject is aware of the nature of what was administered. He is aware of the project designation, the command structure design, and the current anomalous integration state. I do not know how he obtained this information. This requires investigation independent of the current situation. More significantly, research analyst Oreville has confirmed, at my direct request, that the passive monitoring broadcast has been active since administration and has produced no command response from the nanite package. The subject's account of the integration state, that his own neural patterns have established command priority over the external protocol, appears to be consistent with Oreville's monitoring data. I need to be direct with you, Director. I cannot execute a forced recall under these circumstances. The subject is cooperative and has made reasonable requests. The alternative, attempting to force compliance, involves activating a command protocol against a nanite integration that is behaving outside all design parameters, in a subject who is alert and responsive, and whose own nervous system may actively resist the protocol. There is no data on what that does to the subject. There is no data on what it does to the nanites. And if something goes wrong with a human crew member on a joint species ship with 17 Vrel witnesses, and a Dranathi ship's medic who is already in this subject's confidence, the incident becomes a great deal larger than a research recovery operation. I am also going to say something that I suspect you do not want to hear, and I am saying it on the record because I think it needs to be on the record. The subject's characterization of what was done to him is accurate. He was administered a classified research compound without his knowledge or consent, under false pretenses, while he was experiencing a medical episode. The batch number recorded in ship's logs was falsified. The administering researcher, Oreville, was operating under Project Sovereignty authorization, but Project Sovereignty authorization does not supersede Alliance medical ethics protocols requiring informed consent. We are exposed, Director, not just procedurally, substantively. What was done to this man was wrong, and he knows it was wrong, and he has handled the knowledge of it with more restraint and more good faith than I think this organization has any right to expect. He has asked for 3 things. I am recommending we agree to all 3. I am recommending we agree to them completely and without reservation, and without any attempt to negotiate down the documentation requirement, which I suspect will be the instinct of the legal division. The documentation requirement is, frankly, the most important thing he asked for, and agreeing to it, meaning it, following through on it, is the only path I see that does not make this significantly worse. Awaiting authorization to proceed. Vrenkath, Senior Auditor, GMA Oversight Division. Segment 13, Testimony of NELLA Prize. Continued. They agreed. That's what I want people to understand who come to this document looking for the dramatic confrontation, the big standoff, the moment when humanity showed the galaxy what we're made of. There was something like that moment in the corridor when Marcus stood in front of Vrenkath and was just clear. But then there were 3 days of consultation and documentation and carefully worded agreements, and the drama of that is mostly in the precision of the language, and whether you understand what the precision was protecting. I sat through most of it with Marcus. He asked me to, and I was there. Lessa was there. Yusuf was not. He was still on shift, still not fully briefed, still wearing his uniform perfectly, but I told him everything afterward, and the expression on his face when I told him is something I carry with me. Not shock, not outrage, just a very young person processing what it means that this happened and what it means that Marcus handled it the way he did. The documentation was the thing. Marcus had been right to make that the 3rd condition, and he'd been right to say he wouldn't negotiate it down. The GMA legal team wanted soft language. They wanted administrative procedure not followed, and subject not informed of compound composition prior to administration. Clinical, passive, the kind of language that tells you something happened while obscuring what it was. Marcus sat across a table from 2 GMA legal representatives and said, very calmly, the language I want is, Research Analyst Keth Oravel administered classified research nanites to a human crew member without the crew member's knowledge or consent, while the crew member was experiencing a medical episode, under the fraudulent pretense of administering a GMA standard stabilizing compound. That's the language. I can wait while you check it. They checked it. It took about 4 hours of back and forth. The language in the final record is not exactly that. It's more formally worded, but it says the same thing. It says what it was. Oravel was removed from the ship at Cycle 13. Marcus was not on deck when Oravel departed. I was. Oravel walked past me without stopping or acknowledging me, and I watched him go. I don't have anything particularly profound to say about that moment. It just happened. He walked off the ship. That was the end of his presence in our lives, at least in the direct sense. The investigation into Project Sovereignty was a separate process. Marcus was interviewed twice. He gave detailed testimony both times. He was not the one who brought down the project. That was a longer institutional process, driven partly by what the investigation uncovered about how many other people had been targeted or planned to be, and partly by Vrenkath's willingness to put his concerns on the record. But Marcus's testimony was part of the foundation of it. Segment 14, Personal Log of MARCUSDALEN Holt. Entry date, Cycle 30, Month 4. I've been back on regular duty for 2 weeks. Outer hull checks, the plasma conduit seals, the whole routine. My hands still know what to do without my brain needing to be particularly involved. And my brain has the added awareness now, the nanites, always there, always present, the way your own heartbeat is always present. They're still responding to me, only to me. The GMA sent a specialist, not an adversarial visit, a genuine one, someone from the biomedical engineering division who was honestly, almost painfully curious to assess the current integration state. He spent 3 days running scans with Lessa observing, and his conclusion, delivered with the specific enthusiasm of someone who has found something genuinely new, was that the integration appears to be stable and is showing no signs of the command hierarchy shifting back toward external response. He used the word bonded. He said it cautiously, academically, the way scientists use words they're not fully sure about yet, but he said it. The nanites are bonded to me. I'm not entirely sure how I feel about that. It's not a simple feeling. There's the part that's still angry, that probably will always be a little angry, when I think about how the bonding came to exist, that it exists because someone put a classified system in me without asking, and my body did something unexpected with it. The anger is legitimate. It gets to stay. There's also, and this is harder to talk about, because it sounds like I'm making peace with something that shouldn't be made peace with, there's the part that finds it interesting. The way it's changed my work. The way I move through maintenance cycles now with an awareness I didn't have before, a precision that isn't quite human by itself, but has grown out of something human. My maintenance error rate in the past 3 weeks is down 40%. I know what's wrong with a system before the scanner tells me. I know where the stress points are, where the wear is, where the next thing to fail will be. I'm better at my job. I hate that that's true, but it's true. Yusuf asked me about it the other day. Directly, the way he does things, he's straightforward under the careful uniform, this kid, more than he looks. He asked if I wished it hadn't happened. If given everything, I would undo it. I thought about it honestly. I'd undo how it happened, I said. In a heartbeat. The headache and the medical bay and Orrevel and the fake batch number, all of that gone. That whole apparatus of it being done to me instead of asked of me, I'd undo that completely. But the nanites themselves, he said. I looked at my hands, pressed one palm against the wall of the crew mess, where we were sitting, the way I'd pressed my hand against the table that first evening. The ship unfolded in my awareness like something breathing, like something I was a part of. That, I said, is a harder question. Yusuf nodded. He sat with it. That's something I appreciate about him. He doesn't rush to fill silence. After a while he said, do you think they'll try it again, on someone else? Vrenkath thinks no, I said. The documentation, the investigation, it changes the risk calculation. And they know now that the human integration doesn't work the way they planned. So even from a purely practical standpoint, they don't get what they wanted. But they might find another species, Yusuf said. Adjust the design. I thought about that. About project sovereignty and what it would take to stop a project like that, not just delay it. What institutional change, what documented precedent, what clearly established standard would need to exist for this particular category of thing to stop being done. Yeah, I said, they might, that's a different fight, a bigger one. But not your fight, Yusuf said, not accusingly, just checking. I'm a maintenance technician, I said. He smiled at that, the slight one, the real one under the formal exterior. Sure, he said. You're just a maintenance technician. Segment 15, Final Archival Note. Compiled by Office of Galactic Incident Review, Subdivision 9. Cycle 5, Month 7, Year 3 of the Provisional Alliance. Project Sovereignty was placed under formal review by the Galactic Medical Authority Review Board in Cycle 20, Month 4 of this year. Research Analyst Keth Oravel was suspended pending investigation. Director Mevan Salas was placed on administrative leave. The full scope of the project, including how many other individuals had been identified as potential subjects, and what the project's long-term operational goals involved, is still under investigation as of this document's compilation date. 7 other individuals, 4 Vrel, 2 Drenathi, 1 Kishan, were identified in project files as having been administered sovereignty nanites under similar conditions of fraudulent consent. All 7 were located and informed. 3 of them, upon learning what they carried, requested immediate removal. Removal procedures for 3 of those subjects were initiated. The 4th, a Vrel engineer requested time to decide. As of this document's compilation, the Kishin subject has not responded to contact attempts. Marcus Dalen Holt declined removal. His reasons, given at the formal inquiry, are recorded here verbatim. I've thought about it. Removal involves significant neural intervention to detangle the nanites from the pathways they've integrated with. The medical team tells me the risk profile is manageable but not trivial, and I've spent 4 months now understanding what they do, understanding how I work with them, and I don't feel threatened by them. They've answered to me from the beginning. The thing that was dangerous was never the technology itself. The dangerous thing was a system that decided it had the right to put technology in people without asking. If you fix that system, and that's what this investigation is supposed to do, the technology in me isn't the problem. I'm keeping them my call. Just like it should have been from the start. Dr. Lessa filed an independent medical report to the Alliance Health Oversight Authority, describing the full progression of the COVID-7 incident. Senior Auditor Vrenkath submitted a formal request for review of GMA research ethics protocols, specifically regarding the authority of Research Division to authorize medical procedures in operational field environments. That review was opened in Cycle 2, Month 6. Crew member Marcus Dalen Holt returned to full duty on the gas Coranthos at Cycle 15, Month 4. His service record notes, in the period since the incident, a 43% reduction in maintenance error rate, a commendation from Commander Drathevos for systems diagnostic work during the Month 5 engine fault inspection, and one informal notation, added by Commander Drathevos himself, which is unusual, that reads, "Crew member Holt is one of the most precise technicians I have encountered in 14 years of command. He appears to have developed an intuitive understanding of ship systems that is, by any conventional measure, exceptional. He does not discuss the reasons for this. He does not need to." Sergeant Nella Prize remains aboard the Coranthos. Her own service record is unmarked by the incident, except for one self-submitted note in her personnel file. Was present, would make the same calls again. Crew member Yusuf Barrett, 22 years old, Terran Fleet Academy class of Year 1, Provisional Alliance, continues to wear his uniform exactly right.